Wow. Thank you, Rich. That's so fun. I'll never think about my company name without thinking of an apron now from now on, especially with Thanksgiving. I mean, that's perfect. So, good morning, everybody. David, I have to say, I loved your song. It is so perfect for where this is at and the winter and the harvest and all the steps in there. Thank you for that. That's really good. I'll be humming that all day. I also noticed that you all do this when you're instead of clapping, which I was going to ask you this morning to do. So cool. You guys are way ahead of me. And so good morning to all of you in the congregation and also to friends of mine that are joining as well. And it's just a pleasure to be here. And then I'll get to see you again, technology working for us, December 5th as well. So for No Room at the Inn. So as you're all aware, this coming, it's already here. This coming Thursday is Thanksgiving Day. Are you ready? Do I see a show of, yeah, yeah, yeah. Rich, I love that. Do you know that it's been going since 1623, when the first Thanksgiving was established? If you want to do some fun, look on the history of Thanksgiving, because it's not the way the school books have painted it. There were so many different things, but over time, we've kind of romanticized it. And it'd be a great history lesson if you have grandchildren. And so many of us set aside one day, a special day, to be thankful, because of course it's the holiday. But Thanksgiving means different things to different people. For instance, for some, Thanksgiving represents a 4-day weekend, a vacation from work, and the routine of the daily grind. If that speaks to you, you can let me know. Some people can't wait for Thanksgiving to be over because it represents one of the biggest shopping opportunities of the year. Okay, let me see who's all going to be out there. You're all smart. And then, of course, there's football games, nonstop football games. My son will be doing that, sitting in front of the television, one game after another. Some of us put up our Christmas trees and turn those on in preparation for the time of Advent. Do I see anybody who's going to do that? Oh, Dixie. Okay. And for many of us, it will be the day of feasting, working for days to buy, to grow, to prepare, just like David's song, to harvest, to create the great food, turkey, ham, tofu turkey, mashed potatoes, gravy, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie galore, the old gobble till you wobble kind of thing. At our house, when our 3 sons were very, very small, the day after Halloween, the decorations of jack-o'-lanterns and witches' hats were boxed right up, and immediately in their place, in the same box, I would pull out the pilgrims that the kids made from first grade. Yes, I'm one of those people. Or the turkey, the little turkey statues, and I'd place them all over the dining room table. And that's also when I would start thinking about the potential of the Thanksgiving or the Friendsgiving guest list, potluck menu, how that would work. All was happy and bright in that time in my life, the slice of life. And now that our sons are all in their 30s and we're expecting our first grandchild, it's time to start thinking about traditions of their own. And I didn't realize how wonderfully important and naive my own upbringing, my own childhood upbringing, and our children's upbringings were until my first year as a senior minister. My Thanksgiving palette would be forever changed. Starting that day in 2017, not to mention blowing up my naive assumptions forever adjusted. Just like today, Sunday before Thanksgiving in 2007, I was saying goodbye to the congregants and the visitors following our worship service. And that's when I noticed one woman hanging back, very far back, and she kept stepping out of the line to greet people as they would exit the church. She kept hanging back, and she asked finally when she was the last one if she could speak with me. And yes, we slipped into a quiet room. And as I closed that door, I turned around to greet this first-time visitor who I'm now. She was beginning to process and profess her childhood experiences of Thanksgiving right then and there. So I took a seat and listened. Her recollections were vivid, including taste, sight, sound, and smell. That is usually somewhat of a clue to us who have had training that there is possible post-traumatic stress involved when all of the systems are engaged so vividly. So she began to tell me. She remembered that an hour before guests arrived, Vivian's mother would be mashing those potatoes. And increasingly, she remembered the banging of the dishes getting louder and louder as if to make her frustrations known to everyone in the house. Nothing ever changed, though, in the way of support. While her father sat on his easy chair drinking a cold one, watching Macy's Day Parade, Vivian recalled how each year her mother's cigarette ash would get longer and longer and the curl would bend down. And she wondered how many times her mother might have dropped those ashes while making the vat of potatoes. She never wanted to know. Alone, her mother spent the better part of 2 days before anybody arrived, preparing the pies, making casseroles, as well as setting the perfect, beautiful table. As a young child, Vivian recalled how angry her mother always seemed to be during those holidays, those times of joyousness. Years later, she shared with me that she realized what a contradictory message it was, since Thanksgiving is about gratitude and love, and all she could feel was the tension and the anger in the house. It was not lost on her either that when the doorbell rang, the TV would be turned off. Robotically, both of her parents would jump up, look at each other, look at Vivian, and then quickly inspect the house to make sure everything was perfect. Her father and her mother would open the door, suddenly beaming with smiles that she hadn't seen since last Sunday or at Thanksgiving the year before. This switch, she shared with me, made her so nauseated and afraid that because she knew what was coming. Year after year for almost 16 years. And I can't stress that enough, 16. Vivian watched those scrumptious dishes parading through the door as her parents would greet all of the people saying, "Good to see you. What dish did you bring?" Folks would arrive proudly, displaying their deviled eggs, their pecan pies, their homemade biscuits, their sauerkraut and dumplings, salads, ham, whatever. They just kept coming. The selection of food was so big that people would be out in the kitchen helping themselves, and it also was put on 2 big tables that they had borrowed from the church to put in their home. As people ate, they freely shared about their lives, and they took in second and third helpings. Laughter filled the room. Seems like a typical Thanksgiving day. Generally, a local aunt and an uncle, friends and neighbors would possibly join, congregants, They would join this family of 3 in what would be called a spectacular feast. And quickly that you'd hear the funny stories, you'd hear children playing, you'd smell the dishes, the different mix of all the smells. You'd see the dripping candles, you'd see the alcohol, you'd see the dishes, and you'd hear the clinking of the dishes. She continued with me. Her father, you see, was the successful Methodist minister of the largest church in her hometown. People loved receiving an invitation from the minister to come to his home for a holiday meal because it was a status thing. And he always prided himself on saying grace at mealtime with his pastoral voice. And let me take you back. We're still sitting in that private room. And I'm watching how Vivian's now staring down at the floor, and she's twisting her Kleenex into knots. Meanwhile, not a lot of attention is being given to the children, who, by the way, are positioned at TV trays further away, the farthest away from the adult tables. However, they were noticed, the children were noticed when Vivian's father would sternly, out of nowhere, ask the children Bible questions, our favorite thing to do, with this very rigid smile. And at last, when the kids would fumble what scripture it was, Vivian's father would call on Vivian promptly to answer the question. And she dare not fail him, or he would beat her mercifully later. She grew up wondering if anyone ever took notice of how her father insisted on serving his precious daughter precisely 4 1-inch apiece sized pieces of turkey and a single slice of bread, and then would pass her the plate. Hungrily, she'd wash down her food with that half glass of water that was poured for her, while the other children received a full glass of milk with heaping plates of food all over her. Long before the other guests had finished eating, Vivian sat silently as she endured the newest lies that her father made up, telling guests who wondered, why wasn't Vivian eating? Vivian wasn't hungry. Vivian was getting over a stomach flu. Vivian ate before they all arrived. You know, the excuses. Year after year, no one ever grew suspect. When her father or her mother gave a certain look, Vivian took her cue silently. She thanked everyone for the meal. She removed her plate to the sink. She went promptly to her room and she readied for bed, knowing all the while that the other children were going to be able to go outside and play in the backyard near her back window until dark, when maybe the guests decided it was time to leave. This innocent little girl repeatedly experienced this abusive ritual and many others for 16 years until she was able to move into another home with a relative out of state. Take a breath. As if Vivian's story of such neglect and cruelty wasn't strange enough for me to hear and hard for me to hear. The very next thing out of her mouth has shaped all of my Thanksgivings privately since, until today, as I share it with you. Not even my own family has known. As an older adult, this beautiful, brave woman confessed to me that she was ready to make peace of all things with her painful past. Her ultimate goal was to clink the glasses, fill her plate, honor everyone's effort and kindness to be at the table without any fear of reproach. She wanted to be like others who could laugh and could swap stories, and she would be the one to say grace. This is what she wanted so much. And would I work with her to help with that healing in order to claim her life? Vivian basically wanted to exchange her sorrow for the utmost gratitude, especially on Thanksgiving days, which I found phenomenal. How could I say anything but yes? There's a Catholic theologian and a writer, Saint Ignatius, who placed gratitude at the top of his prayer list above all else. But it's hard to get to gratitude when you're in such darkness, in such a place of unforgiveness. Let's face it, lack of forgiveness blocks the gifts of Thanksgiving, the true Thanksgiving. So we began 2 years of healing work where we met weekly. And it was evident to me that she was really ready, that she wanted to build foundations. She wanted to invest in herself to do the deepest internal work. I have such respect for that. And among the first things Vivian had to be willing to truly feel were all the feelings she had stuffed down for her 57 years of life. It would mean that she'd need to face all the ways that she was triggered days before, days of, and days after Thanksgiving. And yet, courageously, Vivian determined that she was ready to release and reframe her past, to develop a new sense of confidence and worthiness, and so much more. Essentially, Vivian knew she had to forgive, and she began to find incredible gratitude, one tiny bite at a time. I love Marianne Williamson in her, when she speaks in her writings about forgiveness. When our minds and our bodies move in harmony with love through forgiveness and prayer in the simplest tender thoughts, then mountains move and the universe shifts. For decades, Vivian was forced to swallow a painful, painful truth. Hungry. Yet, and yes, she was victimized, yet now she no longer responds as a victim. She yearned for more. Her talk and her walk, as we talk about Unity's fifth principle, became rebalanced, reframed, reintegrated into her neurons, into her neurology patterns in her mind, body, and her spirit. She really, really came here to be today, not then. This isn't where the sermon quite ends. You might be saying to yourself, okay, Reverend Debbie, that's her experience. That's not my experience. You know, forgiveness is easy. It's, you know, it's just, you just start. But no one knows another one's pain. And that's how Vivian attempted to begin. Instead of telling us how awful it was, yes, she had to tell me the story to give me the information. And yes, she had tears, so I knew she was still connected. But she was willing. She was so willing. One of those 12 powers that Reverend Rich talks about. So as I'm writing this sermon this week, I have tried to take a break from all that's going on in the world. And don't worry, this is not going to turn into anything political. Please know that. But I realized that I needed to look at my work. I needed to think about Vivian again and how Vivian had the courage to be able to look straight at the situations. And so I started looking at mine, and mine were there. Mine were definitely there. My personal issues that maybe I didn't even realize I was hanging on to. Interactions with people that I love. And then I turned on the news, something I try not to do, especially at bedtime. And I saw the state of unrest yet again in our nation, and the increasing polarization, the civil unrest. What a strange couple of words to put. And I began to question my own words for this sermon today. And I paced more preparing this sermon than I have ever before in any of the other messages I've ever done. And I had to sit in my own vulnerability and my raw humanness and slowly analyze what was working for me and what were just words. And I went back to Vivian. I hope that me sharing with you a couple of minutes of my awarenesses might offer some help to you. Upon reading about the news this week, the first thing I did was to react. Boy, did I. I stopped taking full breaths. I did a quick body scan and I knew I was angry. I knew I had passion. I knew I felt helpless. So I did what any other normal person would do. I headed to Facebook to shout and scream about my anger and my passion, justifiably. By the time I finished typing my thoughts and not hitting send, I could tell I needed to walk away. I wasn't equipped with coming from a place of responding. I was strictly reacting. I needed to come back to who I am. Secondly, I made myself do two separate things. I forced myself into a timeout. Deliberately pausing and then separating from technology. I set down my phone, I moved away from this computer, and I walked away. Thirdly, I reached out for moral support around my feelings. Thank goodness I have a wonderful husband that I could look to and say, I need to talk, and I need to talk right now. Can you put down the yard rake? If you don't have that person in your home, you need to get a go-to person or people in advance. Get them in advance. Make a pact with them. Don't wait until you're angry and then go look for your person or your people. Start the conversation if you need to call someone, or like I did with my husband, walk out and say, I need to process something right now. Do you have the time? Are you available? It can't wait. I also tell him, and this has been wonderful for 43 years of marriage, I also say to you, I need to vent. I need you just to listen, not problem solve. That works. After we talked, I also took deliberate time. Even then, I soothed myself. I look for things that will soothe me. And I gave myself simple, quick rewards. I was trying to transfer and transmute patterns in my brain that were of anger and helplessness into soothing. I discover what calms me: walking, gardening, reading a novel, not the newspaper, needle pointing, tinkering in the workshop, baking, crafts. I recommend you do not head toward the kitchen. You do not pull out a beer. Do something that makes you feel capable, in control, in a beneficial way that's instantaneous, because that's a boundary. Finally, I made room when I could feel my feet coming onto the ground. I made room for spirit to turn it over to spirit. Not my way, but your way, God. I moved my anger and my pride and my righteous indignation. I moved my ego, out of the way. So I sat in quiet and I said, tell me what you need to tell me. I'm listening. I got grounded. I affirm that forgiveness is not for only other people, but for myself. In my quick-temperedness, in my desire to lash out, I gave myself compassion and tenderness that I needed so much because I was hurting. I didn't sit in judgment. Within the Bible, there are hundreds of references to humility, to pridefulness, to forgiveness, and eventually to gratitude. Apostle Paul in the book of Romans tried to explain forgiveness. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Repay no one evil deed for evil deed, but give heart, to do what is honorable in the sight of all. At that moment, I invited gratitude like Vivian to replace my pain. It may be too soon at times for people to let go of their fear, their rage, their pain, their feelings of despair, their compassion fatigue. But I realized I was walling off my heart. And so I went back and repeated these steps that I just shared with you several times. I also thought about Vivian and how she was successful after a couple of years of reducing the triggers and the loneliness. I realized that I got to be a sacred witness who watched her transform. And it is possible to transform hatred into love, I promise you. Without knowing it, Vivian was ministering to me and gave me hope. I too can do that. If she had the courage, so could I. When we forgive someone, especially ourselves, we are connecting to God as close as we ever can be. That's our God essence is expressing. Because at that moment of forgiveness, we demonstrate the very heart of God, the very essence of God. The very heart of God is that we would love to forgive one another. A portion of the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6 reads, "And forgive us our debts first, as we then forgive our debtors." In no way possible was Jesus trying to send a subliminal message or be even a little bit obtuse. He was right to the point. Start with yourself first. This is not a plea of merit. This is a plea of grace. Those who come to God for the forgiveness of wrongdoing, disappointment, extreme pain, or debilitating mistakes by another or ourselves must first decide we're ready. I love Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he says, forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a constant attitude. That meek visitor that walked through the church doors 14 years ago today joined our church. Vivian went on to be a humble, inspirational leader. She never spoke about her childhood issues to anyone else. They no longer took up space in that precious, precious being of her mind, body, and her spirit. Instead, she channeled her newfound gratitude, attitudes, and positivity into her first volunteer position, coordinating the church potluck on Thanksgiving Day, where congregants and their families, neighbors, and friends all around us arrived with their special dishes. There were no separate tables set aside, tucked out of sight for the children. They sat in the rows and rows of long tables amidst all ages, like everybody else. And you can be sure that Vivian genuinely greeted every single person at the doors, as she was the one running it. And as they would enter the fellowship hall, she would say, "Welcome. We are glad you are here. What dish did you bring to share? God bless you." And let's take Vivian and our own thoughts about this day into our time of meditation together.